Hi.
Nice. Hi, everyone. Hi, I'm Morgan. I'm head of sales at Localize, and today I'll be speaking with Christine about global mobility in the UK. Christine, I'll let you have a quick moment to introduce yourself before we start our conversation.
Sure. Thanks, Morgan, and thanks, Localize. I'm really excited to be here today. So I'm Christine. I'm the head of talent and media at Quantum Motion. So we are a hardware quantum computing startup. I've spent the last 10 years hiring in the UK, mainly in talent acquisition functions. And I've worked in startups, so Yieldify, which is funded by Google Ventures and SoftBank, and then the app business, which is a mobile development agency. And more recently, before I joined Quantum Motion, I was at the Financial Times, which is, of course, a kind of global business newspaper. So, yeah, I've got experience hiring across various companies at different sizes and shapes and different teams. So, yeah, looking forward to having this chat with Morgan today, just about, the impact of how everything's been happening recently on hiring talent.
Thanks for the intro, Christine. So I think it's safe to say that you're at the very front line when it comes to hiring. What would you say have been the key trends, the key changes from 2019 in the hiring scene, especially in the UK?
Yeah, I think you're thinking pre-COVID and post-COVID life is like two completely different, two different times. I was like BC and before Christ and after Christ, kind of situation. But of course, I think we talk about Brexit firstly, right? And at the time, I think because there was just so many uncertainties in terms of what will happen and how will that impact companies and how does that impact even people in the UK. And once the policies were in place, companies were able to start kind of figuring out, right, how do we engage with the settled status. And actually people who were in the UK then had to question whether or not they wanted to stay in the UK. But that was kind of pre-2019 talent challenges. So since 2019, of course, we had 2020 COVID. I think the first wave of COVID was not we had the first impact of layoffs and redundancies, and also, of course, the furlough scheme. That was a massive challenge, I think, for companies, because it's been such a big um, hiring optimism wave for about 3 to 5 years. And then when 2020 happened, no one really knew what was going to happen next, right? Hiring freezes were happening, advertising budgets were all slashed. And therefore, hiring teams were kind of forced to kind of rethink how best to, mobilize their teams, right? So I think that was the first wave of hiring challenges. So that was 2020. Now, 2021 then happened. So in 2020, we saw hiring freezes, right? Redundancies, furlough schemes being taken. And then 2021, it then became a massive hiring spree again, because all the hiring freezes meant there was more budget for 2021. Therefore, headcount that were frozen in 2020 then were reactivated in 2021 on top of the additional headcount of 2021. So 2021 was insane hiring. And I think, coming out of 2021 was so optimistic. And we saw it on also the world of talent, because I think when the world of hiring stops, talent acquisition is always the first to see it, right? So if we're not hiring, our roles are always first to go. So 2021 was quite dire. 2020 was quite dire for the world of talent. 2021, it kind of got back again. And then now we're seeing in 2022 tech layoffs again. So it's been just going up and down the last 3 or 4 years. If you're seeing all the news in the US this year, I think there's been over 100,000 tech layoffs across not just startups, but in bigger companies. We're hearing Meta making layoffs. Amazon, and also, all these kind of Web3 companies, which were optimistically hiring all throughout 2020 and 2021. So I think that's a really interesting change in terms of, if there's layoffs happening now, what would that mean in terms of hiring moving forward? So companies are now also kind of figuring out, stress testing a lot of their business strategies. And I would say mindfully hiring would be the best way I'm putting it. Companies are still hiring here in the UK, but maybe more mindful in terms of the role. So not crazy hockey stick rocket ship growth, but maybe more figuring out leaner teams that they can work with moving forward. So I think that's how the industry has been moving to in tech anyway, more specifically the last 4 years.
And just kind of bouncing off what you just said, I was reading a report by Atomico and Slush on the state of the European hiring, and they were saying that, they stated that especially in Europe, companies are growing, they're getting investment, and they're growing faster than they can actually hire, attract, and retain talent. What would you say? Like, what is your take on that?
Yeah, and I guess this is kind of specifically to the UK as well, for some
Yeah.
of the international audiences. Yeah, so there was also a report by Adzuna, which is a kind of job aggregator here in the UK. This was done, bearing in mind, back in May 2022, so May this year, where there was over 870,000 tech and digital job vacancies between January and May, so Q1 and Q2 this year. So that is the highest number ever recorded on the Adzuna platform since inception of Adzuna, which was in May 2012. So I think, if you're looking at the number of vacancies and then you get reverse engineer it in terms of graduates that's coming out in the market, right? We can't fill this roles fast enough. And this is also just the assumption that most of these roles are going to be really tech. I say tech heavy. So by that, I mean really specific skills like software engineering, even like product development. But bearing in mind, there's so many other roles in tech now, right? You can work in sales, HR, talent, solutions engineering, product management. So I think there's lots of different ways that companies at the moment in the UK approach particular when they have vacancies. And I think with respect to you talking about attraction, candidate attraction is always, I think, one of the key challenges that companies here face. I think just because especially with software engineering talent, they're never looking. They're always, when they're in a role, they're happy where they are. They love their tech challenges. So to be able to attract talent away from where they are currently working, you need to ensure that you've got a really great employer brand. And not just that, but it is a technical challenges that you're working on interesting enough for them to leave their current company. And I think a lot of engineers that I work with as well, and especially I think looking forward into the Gen Z, it's also more so like looking at the ethical impact. So the ESG element, are you actually, saving the world? Is there a sustainability element? So there's a lot of different things that actually candidates are looking at nowadays, more so than just a product and the culture itself. And I countered this myself when I think in my last role, we offer pension, for example, as part of our benefit scheme. So the candidates were asking, oh, so where's your pension provider? Like, who's your pension provider and where's the money going? So it's to that level of not just even your company, but who are your partners and who you're associated
Yeah.
with. So that was quite an interesting, I guess, question to be asked from that aspect. So that's attraction. Engaging with talent. So once they're in the talent pipeline, right, you get them through the process, they go through the interview, and you want to give them the offer. Also, the reality is they're probably interviewing at least 3 or 4 other companies as well. So, what would
Sure.
you get a candidate engaged to your company and get them to say yes to you versus 3 or 4 other offers. And the reality is, in where I am now, startup world, we're not going to be competing with some of the bigger players who probably have free food every day. From what I hear, massages on site, and we don't have any of that. So
Yeah.
how are you able to build a compelling package to be able to attract the candidate? And last but not least, we talk about retention, which I'm sure we'll discuss more about later. But especially during the optimistic, coming out of 2020 and 2021, when there's so many opportunities, candidates are entertaining different offers everywhere. So, as a company perspective, how can you retain talent in such a buoyant market? So, yeah, that's all the kind of different facets.
That's really interesting what you say. I actually had a point regarding just the UK, because something that the Evening Standard shared was that people in the Great Resignation, the trend that we're all very familiar with. People in the UK are resigning at the fastest rate, at the highest rate in over a decade.
Yeah.
And actually 69% of the workers in the UK are looking for a change in employment, looking for different job opportunities, compared to 41% of the global market. How would you say in the UK, or how have you seen companies in the UK find creative means to attract more talent, retain that talent, and engage with that talent?
Yeah, I think the Great Resignation was an interesting one. So I was at a conference. Was it last year? Yeah, last year. It was 2021 July, and I remember when we were at this conference, it was the height of the Great Resignation. At that point, and this is not just tech, by the way. I know today our focus is mainly on tech, but there was over 1 million job vacancies
Oh,
live in the UK alone at that time, and it was coming out of COVID, and again kind of veering away from tech for just a kind of short moment, but we were seeing the impact across all different industries, right? You were, F&B, there was staff shortages, airline industry, right? Like people are flying again, and you're hearing a lot of flights being cut short, luggage handlers are striking, like all the industries was just completely on a standstill here in the UK, and you really felt the
yeah.
impact of that actually living here. So, when you're talking to a lot of kind of talent and HR professionals in the space, you're like, okay, well, there's so many different options out there. What can we do? So I think coming out of COVID, and I think we will touch upon this later as well, is that people start to value flexibility more. And because you had the opportunity to work from home, and for those who've got families, and who have other loads of personal interests, you were able to pursue all of that within your own time. And I speak to people as well who maybe even spend like 1 hour commuting to the office, and that's 2 hours back and forth. That's 10 hours a week, right? So
For
imagine
sure.
that 10 hours a week you could be going off and I don't know, doing painting, or like rock
Hobbies
climbing or something.
and
Yeah, like you're doing something else. Or for
yeah.
those of you in the next generation, having side hustles is really important as well. So that 10 hours could actually contribute to additional revenue for those who like having side hustles. So yeah, I think coming out of that, employers are probably more understanding that people value their personal time more, and how do you incorporate that? I think pre 2020 employers are very dedicated to, well, you're only working for us and we want this person
Yeah.
to adhere to our values and whatnot, whereas now you're starting to be more open. I think UK employers are a bit more open in terms of, okay, well, people have a life outside of work, and how do we
So they should.
yeah, they should. And then how do we allow that to happen on top of that? So yeah, that's I think one of the biggest trends that we're seeing.
Interesting. And how would you say like this has affected, have you seen differences in how it's affecting how SMEs are working, how startups are working, or how like bigger corporations are working? Have you seen differences in like is everyone reacting in the same way, or have you seen differences in the way that they tackle this change?
Yeah, yeah. So we are very much a startup. So we're 20 people plus 14 PhDs. To be honest, when we joined last year, we weren't crazily hiring anyway. So it hasn't really impacted us at the moment. So for us, we adopt a talent first approach. So we hire the best talent. If they're international, we will do everything, all it will take to bring them on board.
Mhm.
But speaking to some of my peers, so one of my former companies, like with the FT, also no change. I think bearing in mind the industry that we operate in is product and technology. I think whereas we're seeing layoffs in the US within the tech sector, it hasn't quite rippled into the UK just yet. And even so, the companies that I'm hearing that are making layoffs, like Meta, Amazon, most of the impact has been more on business operations, HR, talent, some commercial, but very little in software engineering, data science, product management, designers.
Mhm.
So I think in these kind of niche skill sets, what we'll find is that companies will always be hiring, or at least always be on the lookout for really strong talent in this space. So yeah, I think SMEs and scale ups, though, I think with COVID and having allowing the flexibility, what we're actually seeing from our own employee populations, that people want, along with the flexibility element, is that people want to work remotely, right? So people want to say, hey, actually, I've got family back home, like my parents are in Asia, I want to go back to Hong Kong, can I work there for 3 months? Some companies might say no, because of tax issues, maybe take a holiday, right? So for some employees, they're like, well, this other company is offering me full flexibility, so I'm just going to go and join them, right? So I think SMEs and scale ups and startups are realizing that more so. So some of my peers I've spoken to will say, yeah, they're starting to have operations in place to set up teams to be able to hire remotely. So entirely, they might outsource their dev teams to, let's say, Poland, or one of my friends recently in Bulgaria as well. So entirely outsourcing the entire function. Or you can set up entities locally. So that meant if someone from the UK, let's say, wanted to go work in Barcelona, like yourself, they can go and set up there. Now, there's also platforms as well, which enables us to do that. So I think Deal is one where companies can hire contractors overseas, and Omnipresent is another one for permanent staff if you want to hire EU talent overseas. And of course, for those who want to hire anyone in the UK, there's Localize, which we use.
Great. And yeah, that's actually an interesting point. We did a survey in Localize not long ago, and it found that most candidates are now valuing, even above their base salary and extra time off, they're valuing the possibility of working from home or working remotely. Like you say, like they have families, they have hobbies, they have different obligations outside of work, and they want that flexibility to be able to have more of a work-life balance.
Yeah.
So it's definitely moving forward, and it's something that I also value personally, being able to work from home and work from anywhere.
Yeah, and I think as well, diversity inclusion is of course on the agenda of a lot of companies, right? So one thing when I went to the FT, like our brief was, well, we want to hire at the time, this is pre-2020, more female engineers, post-2020, socioeconomic backgrounds, and of course after Black Lives Matter. But what we found is when you hire for diverse talent pool, the reality is they want more flexibility, because you think about you hiring senior women into the workplace, they want to have families, they want to do the school pickup run, nurseries and whatnot. There's something that we never even factored into going into it, but 100%, like if you want to hire diverse talent, but you actually don't even have the flexibility in place, then I would say, like, forget about it. Like, don't even think about diverse hiring.
It's just it's difficult to compete with loads of companies that can be similar to your own that are offering that. And, people are really seeing as well, like the increase in burnout, the increase in awareness of mental health. Like you need to be able to have that work-life balance and spend more time with family. I've got family in the UK, I've got family in France. I want to be able to kind of juggle, between that, and spend more time with loved ones. So interesting. Do you have anything else you want to add to this part of the point?
Yeah, I think it's tricky because from a business perspective, right? And then I think I see this now because we are a hardware company. People are in, like, we have labs, so people have to come to the office to run experiments and design stuff together. So it's a bit hard if, let's say, some companies say we need you to come in the office and stipulate that. And then you're hearing companies actually during COVID tests, Twitter, Facebook were first to say, right, let's all go remote. But it's interesting now coming back into it, they're now saying we don't want it. Like we're actually saying, if you're not coming into work, then don't
categorically
work, right? So it's just completely flipped, right? So like how much has changed over the last 3 years? Like look at Tesla, look at Twitter. They're saying, we want everyone back in the office 40 hours, right? That's even more than what was before COVID. So yeah, it'll be interesting to know what the trends will look like moving forward. And I think, back to the first question about the trends, because of the Great Resignation, so where employees had more choices, whereas now with the layoffs, if that is going to continue, and some say we're now heading potentially towards another recession, does that mean the pendulum will swing back to the employers, and now employers will have more say in terms of what will happen? So yeah, we will see over time. But I think the companies that will thrive are the ones who manage to find that happy medium. And another thing to that, and I think we might kind of discuss this as well, is, in the UK, because there's been so much political turmoil in the last 6 months, all the news that's been coming out has been so negative. And actually, a lot of the international talent that I'm speaking to, they'll say, well, I'd love to come to UK. It seems like a great country, but what's happening to your politicians? Why are they leaving? Why is there a new one in the next month? Is there a cost of living crisis? Is energy bills at an all-time high? Is it going to be uncapped? These are all questions I have to field on top of just what you want to join a company, I have to sell the country on top of that. So I feel like the UK also has a bit of an image issue right now. There's a lot more than just, come work for us, but why the UK? It's also another impact that I'm seeing.
No, for sure. That's actually bouncing off the next question I was going to ask you. Why do you think international hiring is so pivotal for the UK? Why is it so?
Yeah, Good question. Well, there's not enough graduates, right? Firstly, for the roles that we're trying to fill. And again, because we're talking about tech. So let's say computer science in general. I think the last stat I saw was every computer science grad that's coming out, there's at least 10 vacancies to one computer science grad. But bearing in mind, right, like not all companies are going to be hiring computer science grad for software engineering roles. You have other options and
Mhm.
alternatives. So you can go to coding boot camps. Some companies would be happy to also bring them on board as a graduate and upskill them. But the reality is there's so much niche skill sets that there's just not enough talent pool. And I can draw from my current work, well, from where I am at the moment. So we have an electronics engineering team, and they design chips. So the big chip companies here are like, ARM, for example. And then you go like Taiwanese companies, TSMC, and in America. So all the grads I'm seeing this year, even from interns, there's 80-90% of them are not UK students, they're international
Mhm.
students, right? So I think a lot of this has to be solved from a grassroots level if we want to hire internally in the UK. But the reality is the talent just isn't there. So we need to lean heavily on talent outside of the UK. And I think secondly as well, homegrown talent who are in the UK will also get snapped up easily in Silicon Valley. So yeah, I think you see a lot of just kind of shifting around. But yeah,
Mhm.
I'm hopeful that this will change, and if the visa processes kind of get simpler, hopefully it will make things easier for us. But another thing that's been quite challenging for me recently is, and that's what Brexit has impacted, is actually hiring interns. Historically, when you in companies, we hire interns and who've got a master's degree or PhDs, for example, who are specializing in that particular skill set, bring them on board and potentially convert them to a permanent hire in the future. But now post Brexit, we actually need to bring on interns, the same process as we do for permanent staff. Not the full process, but it's a much lighter version, and we still need to pay £800 per visa for an intern. So yeah, it's just one of those situations where it's costly for companies, but at the same time, if we need the diversity, if we need the talent that can actually do what we need, the reality is we need to set some budget aside, to support us with building great teams.
No, for sure. That's crazy as well because, when you talk about business planning, this is also something we do in sales leadership a lot, no? Like,
Yeah,
see if we can hire interns so that they can learn with the company and it's at a lower cost. So it's, obviously it's giving great opportunities, but if that's changing the way in which you're able to hire that is duplicating the cost or even tripling the cost, that completely changes how businesses can plan for the year ahead in their
yeah.
hiring.
Yeah, and I really empathize. Like, I think at least in tech, because of course we got like Tech City UK. We have all these kind of new visas that's always coming out, like the entrepreneur visa, the skilled visa. Like, there's a lot of different initiatives I think the government is always supporting the tech industry with. But I do empathize with other industries. Let's say like in nursing, like we always hear there's a massive shortage in nursing and kind of various industries, construction. So yeah, I really do empathize in other industries where it may take them longer, and they really need the talent because, well,
And
if you
yeah,
don't
they
have
need to
nurses in
invest,
hospital, how do they
especially,
operate?
yeah, for
Yeah,
sure. And I think this will be one of the last points we touch upon. The famous, very well known trend, the Great Resignation.
yeah,
How would you say, how would you say, like in a nutshell, that this has affected companies' hiring plan
yeah,
and how they
yeah,
act?
yeah. I guess this is kind of taking us back to 2021 again. So last year, I would say from a company's perspective, because people were leaving, you had very kind of knee-jerk reactions from internal teams, like, "Oh my God, like this person's leaving." Hopefully, companies would have been strategic enough to have done succession planning,
Mm.
looking at high potentials. So for the ones who are leaving, who are high potentials, ideally, you should be able to give them is a counter offer or exciting projects to keep them, to retain them. But in the case where you haven't done that, I think the knee jerk reaction that companies also seeing is what we're calling talent hoarding. So it's a new terminology. I think it came out on Harvard Business Review. But essentially what it is the act of
Yeah.
making sure your best employees stay within the team.
Mhm.
So as I mentioned earlier, like, giving them projects, giving them a pay rise. And you hear this all the time, like, right? Like when someone hands in the notice, automatically the company says, oh my God, we're going to give you a 30% pay rise. Please stay with us. But actually the longer
Really.
term impact of that, of
Mm.
the talent as well, why didn't you offer me this before? And actually conversely as well, even if that person stays, studies actually demonstrate that they will leave anyway in the next 6 months to a year. So there's two ways you can look at it from an internal perspective. You can go, well, either we keep them and we know they're going to leave, and it gives us some time to backfill and hire and figure out a proper succession plan within the team, or do we just say actually they're going to be motivated anyway? So I think this might be a bigger impact for startups, right? Like if it's a really small team, someone's handed the notice, they're staying, but their morale's not quite there and it's going to impact everyone else. Is it just a better option to let them go and hire someone else? So
Exactly.
there's a lots of kind of different strategic decisions to be made at that point. So I don't think there's a one size fits all. It entirely depends on the size and scope and shape of the business. But that's what I think a lot of internal teams were dealing with at the time. It was quite, let alone knee jerk reactions. Okay, we keep the top performers, but at the same time, do we just let them go? And I think it speaks volumes of the companies as well, who are saying, you know what, like, wish you the best of luck. Really
Exactly.
enjoyed having your time here, and and let them go. I think it speaks volumes versus companies maybe who weren't doing that. So yeah, that's
Completely. No, I think that morale is contagious, and if
yeah,
there's someone in the team that's being negative and kind of bringing the team down,
yeah,
it's just better sometimes let them move on to their next opportunity, and that's that. It's been a good run,
yeah,
but that's that. Things run their
yeah,
course.
yeah.
Perfect. Well, before we start with questions and answers, we actually have two questions from the audience.
Cool.
I think it would be beneficial to kind of wrap up, this conversation. I think it's very clear and very safe to say the tech space has changed hugely in the last few years. There's been a lot of ups and a lot of downs. Companies are still hiring. They're still hiring for data engineers. They're still hiring for data scientists, designers, product managers, more tech profiles. Finding talent remains difficult. Employees have started having a little bit more power over, their wants and their needs. That power is not as strong today. But companies still do have to think about creative ways in which they can attract, retain, and engage with their employees. So yeah, I would say that's how to sum up. I'm not sure if you'd add anything to that,
Yeah,
Christine.
no, that's perfect. Thanks. Yeah. Great roundup.
Well, I'm going to read the questions. So the first question we've got is, in terms of risk taking for global recruitment post-Brexit, are UK companies pivoting more to specific regions,
Mm.
especially with the new points-based visas? And if so, which ones?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Yes and no. I speak to a lot of different companies and different and peers, and it's interesting. I think with the global macroeconomic climate and everything changing. So obviously with the Ukrainian war and happening. I was actually just in an event last week. It was a tech ladies event, and it was supporting Ukrainian women into the industry here in the UK. And I saw there was actually a great influx of Ukrainian tech talent, specifically in software engineering and design, that were in the market. So I saw there was actually a lot of companies who were willing to take on board Ukrainian talent. So that was really great to watch. And of course, they didn't have to apply for a visa because the UK was actually supporting Ukrainian, I suppose, refugees, if you will. And I hate that term, but that's what they were, the visas they were coming in on. So that was actually a great access to talent there, despite a really sad situation. Secondly, there is no specific region. I know a few companies thinking aloud here. There's like Terminal IO. I believe they work with developing developer teams in Bulgaria. There's another company called iTech Art. They work with developers in Belarus. So I think it really depends on the companies, because let's say, and it's interesting because after, let's say, 2020, when teams had to go through the layoffs, redundancies, and whatnot, what I found with a lot of tech teams is they go, oh my god, actually people management is really difficult, right? Hiring is hard, and once you bring them on board, now you got to let them go and figure out redundancies. Like, I don't want to
Yeah.
deal with this anymore. So actually a lot of teams, and so I guess to help with the runway. They were like, let's bring on board an agency, like as a developer agency, like the two I just mentioned earlier. We just outsource it, and then they help us build an MVP, a product roadmap until a certain point, and then maybe we'll have more money next year, and then we'll hire teams again. So what we're seeing is actually just shifts and not hiring people completely within their teams, but actually outsourcing it, and alternatively maybe outsourcing it like hiring contractors. Maybe hiring someone externally as well. So yeah, I wouldn't say there's like specific areas, but I think because of the UK, people like to kind of aggregate with people, with countries closer to home. Portugal's another one as well that I saw, because I think at the same time zone as the UK, and also English speaking countries. So it makes it a bit easier when you're working with local teams. So I think these are the kind of main ones that I'm noticing within tech.
Okay, thanks for the information. I hope that
Yeah.
answers the question. And the second question, and the last question, would be, in the past few years, the UK government has spoken a lot about trying to support more opportunities and quicker visa processing for those wanting to work in North Manchester.
Yeah.
In practice, is this happening, or is it still just very London centric?
Yeah, I mean, I would like to say yes. Actually, I was also at an event 2 months ago with a company called Hack a Job. So they match companies with developers, and they were noticing actually a lot more influx of companies based in Manchester. I think we're seeing hubs outside of London. So I think Manchester was like Boohoo was one. Sainsbury's is another one. Yeah, there's a huge like scene in Manchester. I'd like to think people like to see Manchester and London in a similar light. And especially bearing in mind the whole flexibility element, we're saying people are moving out of London now because they want I don't know, greener air, fresh air, and whatnot. So I'd like to think it's the same. But I think your question was more specific to like the speed and the home office. I
Yeah.
think that's always going to be tricky. All of my last visa processes has taken quite a while. Even someone that's just doing a tier 2 transfer, well, skill migrant transfer now, has taken a while. So I think in terms of timings, I can't say. But in terms of like the cities, I would say London, Manchester, I think is catching up. And if flexible working, everything continues on, I think Manchester, it's safe to say Manchester will catch up pretty soon. And other hubs, of course, would be like Cambridge and Oxford for university spin-offs and more hardware and AI and machine learning. And we're also seeing like Leeds pop up as well, and Newcastle, and of course Scotland, Silicon Glen,
Stay
a lot of
important.
hardware. Yeah, Scotland, Silicon Glen. Yeah, I think Skyscanners in Edinburgh, and of course Silicon Glen is where a lot of gaming companies and a lot of hardware companies will spin out of. So yeah, I'd like to see other parts of the UK start to gain some traction. So yeah, I
Me
think
too.
hopefully that answers your question. Yeah, Scotland I think would be super chilled. Like it's got a great, you can go have whiskey and then go for a hike in the same day.
Exactly. Scotland's great. I would recommend it to anyone. I would.
Yeah.
Perfect. Well, I think that's us done. Thank you for anyone and everyone who has attended. Quick reminder as well that the next session is at 12:30, so in just under half an hour, and we'll be talking about changing the European immigration game. And yeah, thanks very much for attending, and see you in the next session.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.